Before we begin tonight's story, take a deep breath. You've done enough today. This space is for you to rest, to let go, to remember that you are deeply loved. If this story brings you peace, please consider clicking the like button and subscribing to our channel for more quiet stories like this one. It helps us continue creating a place of calm for weary hearts like yours. Now, come, child of God, you've been carrying too much. Let this story remind you that Jesus is near and that it's okay to rest. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want it. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters, that he restores my soul. Psalm 23, 1-3. It was the kind of evening where the world seemed to hush itself. The trees no longer rustled. The birds had tucked their songs away. Even the wind, which had been busy most of the afternoon, had curled up and gone to rest. And somewhere, in a small home tucked into a quiet corner of the countryside, an older man named Caleb sat by his window, cradling a worn blanket in his lap. The day had passed slowly, not in a bad way, but in that heavy, hushed way familiar to those who have lived long enough to know that time does not always need to hurry. Caleb wasn't sad, but he wasn't quite at peace either. Somewhere in between. He had been thinking about his wife again, about the sound of her voice when she hummed in the kitchen, about the way she used to press her hand against his shoulder when she walked past him on the porch. It had been almost 7 years. Grief, he'd learned, was not something you got over. It was something you carried more quietly. And this evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned a faded lavender, Caleb whispered the only prayer he had strength for. Jesus, I'm tired. There were no fireworks in the heavens, no bright visions, but something in the room seemed to exhale with him, as if heaven itself leaned closer. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. There had been so many years of doing, working hard, providing, fixing broken doors, broken fences, broken plans. But here, in the stillness of this quiet room, Caleb didn't need to fix anything. He didn't need to understand the future or revisit the past. He simply needed to be held, to be reminded that someone bigger than him was still watching over him, still shepherding his heart home. And so he closed his eyes, not to sleep yet, but to listen, to the whisper of peace that still speaks when we grow quiet enough. You are not alone. God is near. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Matthew 11:28. That night, Caleb dreamed again. It was the dream he'd had many times before, not vivid or startling, but soft and familiar. He was walking along an old gravel road, the kind you only find in the country, the kind that crunches gently beneath your boots. Trees lined both sides, reaching high into the sky like cathedral arches. Overhead, sunlight poured through the branches in slow golden beams. He didn't know where he was going, but he wasn't afraid. And then he saw it, a little house in the distance. Its porch light was on. It flickered gently in the dusk, like it had been waiting for him, as if someone had known he'd be passing through. He walked slowly toward it, the gravel softer now beneath his steps. And as he reached the porch, he didn't knock. He just sat down on the step. That was all. Just sat there. And somehow that was enough. When he woke up, it was still dark. The kind of dark that wraps around your room like a blanket. The kind that makes you feel both small and safe. He didn't move from the recliner, just opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling for a while. The stillness held him. No thoughts pressing in. No lists to complete. Only a slow awareness that he was being carried. He remembered the dream again. The light, the porch, the quiet welcome. And for the first time in a while, he didn't feel like he had to try so hard to believe in God. He just felt known. Take a deep breath. Let your shoulders drop. You're not alone in this hour. Later that morning, Caleb sat with his Bible, not to study him, not even to read, just to hold it. He liked the way the pages smelled, especially the older ones that had begun to turn soft at the edges. He ran his fingers across a verse that had been underlined years ago. "Come to me, all you who are weary." He closed his eyes again. Weary. Yes, that was the word. Not despairing, not defeated. Just tired in that deep, human way that makes your bones feel old, even when your soul still longs for more. And in that moment, sitting with the old Bible, the verse gently under his hand, he whispered again, "I'm here, Lord, I'm listening." No booming response, just the echo of silence. But the kind of silence that holds you not because it's empty, but because it's full. Full of mercy, full of waiting, full of the nearness of God. You are welcome here, even in your weariness. Bedtime spiritual takeaway: you don't have to chase God down. He's already left the porch light on for you. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Psalm 23:5. The next evening came quietly. Caleb sat by the window again, this time with a cup of tea between his hands. Chamomile. Light and fragrant. The kind his wife used to make for him when the air grew cool and the days grew short. He didn't speak aloud tonight, just listened to the hush of the wind, to the creak of the floorboards as the house settled into its stillness. There had been a time in his life when silence made him nervous. He used to fill it with noise, with work, with television, with plans. Now, he welcomed it. Silence had become a companion, not always cheerful, but honest. And within it, something else often stirred. A gentle awareness of someone else sitting with him, not seen, not heard, but undeniably present. Take a deep breath. Let the silence hold you for a moment. Caleb looked down at the cup between his hands, the way the light touched its rim, the gentle steam rising. He thought of the psalm again. My cup overflows. At first glance, it felt untrue. His life wasn't overflowing, not with activity, not with people. The house was mostly empty now. The rooms echoed when he walked through them. But as he held that warm little mug, something softened in him. Maybe overflowing didn't always look the way he once imagined. Maybe it wasn't noise or movement or laughter around the table. Maybe it was something quieter, like grace that doesn't run out, or peace that lingers longer than it should, or the way a memory can warm your chest like sunlight. He thought about the old wooden table in his dining room. He hadn't used it much since his children moved away. But in his mind, he saw it filled again. Not just with people, but with God's presence. A table he prepared, a table with enough. Enough comfort, enough quiet, enough mercy to meet him even here. Caleb closed his eyes again, let his hands rest gently in his lap. And in the stillness, he pictured Jesus. Not high in distance, but near, sitting across the tables, not speaking yet, just holding a cup too. And somehow that was all he needed tonight. Not a miracle, not a sign. Just the quiet presence of the one who never leaves. Even when the chairs grow empty, he stays. Even when words run out, he listens. Even when we feel too small to ask for anything more, he pours out everything we need. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. Even in the quiet places, your cup is not empty. God is gently filling it with peace. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Psalm 23:6. The next morning, Caleb rose before the sun. There had been no alarm, only a gentle stirring in his spirit, like a whisper nudging him awake. The house was still cloaked in night, but not a frightening night. More like a velvet dark, warm and deep, the kind of night that knows how to wait. He shuffled into the kitchen, turned on one dim light, and made coffee the old-fashioned way, one scoop at a time, with his slow, careful hands. He poured it into his chipped blue mug, the one with the little painting of a lamb on it, and sat back down in the recliner. This time he didn't reach for a book. He simply watched the dark turn to gray, and the gray turned to blue, and the blue slowly to gold. It happened every day, but this morning it felt like a miracle. As light filled the room, his heart swelled with something unexplainable. A gratitude that didn't ask for a reason, a love that didn't need to be earned. Take a deep breath. Let the morning light rest on your face. He thought of the verse again. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me. And in his spirit he asked the Lord, have they really followed me, Lord, all these years? And slowly memory began to rise. He saw his childhood home, the porch swing where his mother used to read scripture aloud on Sunday evenings. He saw the old red truck he drove to school as a boy and the stormy night God kept him safe on. The icy roads. He remembered holding his newborn daughter for the first time, and how her tiny hand wrapped around his finger like a promise. He saw his wife, standing in the backyard with the laundry, smiling up at the sun. He saw himself weeping beside her hospital bed, and how somehow, in the middle of that grief, God held him. Yes, goodness and mercy. They hadn't always been loud, but they had followed. Soft as footstep, sure as sunrise. And now, as an old man wrapped in a worn blanket with coffee warming his palms, he saw it clearly. Mercy had never left him, not even once. Even in the dark, even in the waiting, even in the long nights when prayer was just silence and sighs, mercy was there, trailing him like a quiet friend, always 2 steps behind, never letting him go. He smiled, not because everything made sense, but because for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel the need to understand everything. It was enough to know he had never been abandoned and never would be. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. Mercy walks behind you, always catching what falls, always carrying what you can't. He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. His faithfulness will be your shield and rampart. Psalm 91:4. The day drifted by without hurry. Caleb didn't leave the house. He didn't need to. Some days were like that now, gentle and slow. Like the Lord was teaching him to walk differently, not with purpose, but with peace. He sat by the open window that afternoon, wrapped in his flannel robe. A soft breeze carried the scent of pine and the sound of distant birdsong. He could hear the wind moving through the trees, brushing gently past the leaves like the quiet hem of an angel's garment. It stirred something in him, a longing, not for activity or noise or plan, but for nearness. He closed his eyes and imagined it, the wing of God stretching over him. Not as a picture on a page, but not as a metaphor, but real, felt. present. It wasn't childish to imagine it, not anymore. Not after all these years of walking with Jesus and realizing that his most powerful gifts are often invisible. Take a deep breath. Let the wind carry your soul a little closer. He remembered the way his wife used to hum hymns while folding laundry. One in particular drifted to mind. Under his wings, I am safely abiding. He hadn't thought of that hymn in years, but the words came back like they had been waiting. Though the night deepens and tempests are wild, he murmured them under his breath, not to perform, but to feel them again. There had been tempests, storms of loss, of waiting, of unanswered prayers. But here he was, still held, under his wings. The window creaked softly. The trees continued their sway. And for the briefest moment, Caleb imagined that the wind itself was whispering his name. Not his own name, but the name above every name. The name that had calmed seas, healed the broken, and called Lazarus from the tomb. Jesus. The whisper didn't speak loudly. It didn't need to. Because sometime, when you're older, when you've lived through enough days and cried through enough nights, you come to know that the Lord doesn't always shout to be heard. He often arrives like this in wind, in memory, in stillness. And in the feathered shadow of his love, Caleb smiled again, softly this time. No grand thoughts, no sermons. Just one simple truth that curled gently in his chest. He is still here, still watching, still covering, still whispering peace to all who will listen. Bedtime spiritual takeaway: God's wings still stretch over you, soft as silence, strong as shelter. In returning and rest you shall be saved. In quietness and in trust shall be your strength. Isaiah 30:15. Evening came with a quiet hush, as if the earth itself had slowed its breath. The sun dipped low behind the hills, casting the world in soft gold. Shadows stretched across the wooden floor of Caleb's home, dancing gently with the breeze through the lace curtains. He sat in the old rocking chair near the fireplace. It didn't creak as much as it used to. Maybe the wood had grown used to his rhythm. Back and forth, backs and forth, like the tide of the sea or the steady heartbeat of God. He wasn't trying to think, but thoughts came anyway. Not loud ones, just soft reflections like waves returning to shore. He thought about how much of his life had been spent doing, and how little of it had been spent simply being. He had built houses, raised children, planted gardens, fixed engines, prayed hard. But he wondered now, how many times had he just rested with God, not asking, not pleading, not even repenting, just resting? Take a deep breath. There's nothing to fix in this moment. As the chair moved gently beneath him, he noticed something he hadn't in a long time. Stillness wasn't empty, it was full of presence, full of peace, full of a voice too quiet to be heard by the ears, but too real to ignore. The voice didn't come with instruction, it didn't command or critique. It simply said, "I'm here." Caleb didn't answer right away. He just sat there, rocked slowly, and let his heart listen. "I'm here." It was all he'd ever truly needed. Not answers, not clarity, just that nearness. The quiet companionship of God in the hours when the house felt big and the world felt far. Outside, a single star had begun to twinkle in the growing dusk. And inside, the room felt wrapped in holy quiet. The kind of quiet that says you don't have to carry this night alone. You don't have to be strong right now. You are safe in me. Back and forth, the chair moved, and Caleb let it. He didn't fight the stillness anymore. He welcomed it as the voice of his Father's love, as the rhythm of heaven slowing his breath, as the invisible hand holding his tired soul. He closed his eyes, and for the first time that week, sleep did not resist him. It came like a gift, gentle, free, filled with the softness of God's whisper. You're home, even now. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. Quietness is not a weakness. In God's arms, it becomes your greatest strength. The Lord your God is in your midst, a mighty one who will save. He will rejoice over you with gladness. He will quiet you by his love. Zephaniah 3:17. The night was deeper now. It had settled over the countryside like a soft quilt, tucking the trees and rooftops beneath its darkened folds. Crickets sang their slow, rhythmic song outside Caleb's window, not noisy, not sharp, just steady, like a lullaby written by creation itself. Inside the house, the only sound was the slow tick of the wall clock, marking time not with urgency, but with grace. Caleb stirred in bed, not because he was troubled, but because sometimes the soul stirs when God is close. Even if we don't know why, he turned his head toward the open window and looked up at the stars, pinpricks of light against the wide expanse of eternity. They didn't blink. They didn't shout. They simply were. And somehow that was enough. Take a deep breath. Let the silence speak for a moment. He didn't try to pray in words. Some nights aren't meant for language. He simply laid there and breathed in and out and let God breathe with him. As he did, memories rose again. Not the loud ones, not the painful ones. Just soft scenes. His daughter's small feet running through the garden. His wife's laugh echoing across the yard. A quiet church service in the middle of winter snow falling outside. The sanctuary lit only by candles. He remembered the pastor reading, "He will quiet you by his love." At the time, Caleb didn't understand what that meant. Quieted by love wasn't love loud, joyful strong. But now, in his older years, he was beginning to see real love doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes, it tucks you in. It holds your shaking hands without comment. It stands with you beside graves and in empty rooms. It shows up in the night with no solutions, just presence. That's what God was doing now. Not fixing, not answering, and just being with him. Fully, tenderly, quietly. And Caleb, who once believed that faith was mostly about effort and movement, was learning now that it is also about stillness, about letting God love you in the hours when no one else sees you, letting him sing over you when you have no words left to offer, letting yourself be quieted, not by the world, but by the very heart of heaven. Outside, a breeze rustled through the branches. Inside, Caleb's breathing grew softer, and sleep, that kind companion, returned once more. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. God doesn't always speak through thunder. Sometimes he sings you to sleep with silence and stars. Even to your old age and gray hairs, I am he who will sustain you. I have made you and I will carry you. I will sustain you and I will rescue you. Isaiah 46:4. The morning came quietly, wrapped in low clouds and the soft hush of early fog. Caleb lit a small fire in the hearth, not because the house was cold, but because he liked the way the flames moved, the way the crackle made the room feel alive. It reminded him of old campfires with friends long gone, of his children, small and curled beneath blankets, marshmallows on sticks, of laughter drifting up into the stars. But now the fire was slower, smaller, like him. He pulled the old shawl around his shoulders and sat cross-legged on the rug like he used to when he was young. It took more effort now and a few quiet groans, but once he was settled, he smiled. It felt good to be near the warmth, not just of the flame, but of memory, of God's quiet presence. Take a deep breath. Let your soul lean toward the warmth. He looked into the dancing light and whispered softly, "You're still here." And the words weren't empty. They carried history. He had been through much, more than most ever saw. He had held the hands of the dying. He had stood at thresholds of change, uncertain what would come next. He had stood in empty kitchens and wondered if anyone would walk through the door again. But God had stayed. Not in fireworks, not always in clear answers, but in something deeper, steadier. The warmth that remains even when the fire fades. The voice that echoes long after the song is sung. The embrace that stays even after the world forgets. He ran a hand over his thinning hair. "Even to your old age, yes. Lord, I see now. I thought I had to hold everything together, but you've been holding me. Not just the younger me, running and building and dreaming, but the older me, the slower me, the one who forgets what day it is, who cries at old hymns, who walks a little more carefully down the stairs. And somehow, you still delight in me, not for what I can do, but for who I am. Because you made me, and you don't grow tired of your creation." The fire crackled. The fog outside began to lift. And something within him settled again, the kind of peace that comes not from knowing the future, but from knowing you're not facing it alone. He stayed by the fire long after the flames began to soften. He didn't need them to last forever. Just long enough to remind him. There is still warmth, still purpose, still love even here. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. Even in your gray hairs and quiet mornings, God is still holding you gently, joyfully, and forever. Be still and know that I am God. Psalm 46:10. The afternoon brought with it a soft sunlight that streamed gently through the thinning leaves of September. It was the kind of light that made even old things glow. Caleb stepped outside for a little while, slowly, one step at a time. With his wooden cane in one hand and a folded blanket under the other arm. There was a bench beneath the old sycamore tree, the one he and his wife had planted the year they moved here. It was tall now, strong. Its branches reached wide like open arms. He made his way to it, sat down carefully and let out a long, slow breath. The air smelled of leaves and soil and something else, the sweetness of time. Above him, birds chirped in quiet conversation. A squirrel scrambled across a low branch and paused to stare at him. Caleb smiled back. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The silence around him was already full. Take a deep breath. Let your heart rest beneath the tree. The sun filtered through the leaves in golden patterns, shifting with the wind. They danced across his lap like gentle reminders of God's nearness, playful, quiet, patient. He remembered sitting here years ago with his youngest grandchild on his knee. They had watched the clouds and counted butterflies. Back then, he had still been trying to prove things to himself, to others, maybe even to God. Now, in the stillness of these older years, he was learning a gentler truth. He didn't need to prove anything anymore. He only needed to be God's. To sit still beneath the tree and know that he was enough. Be still. Those words had once sounded like an interruption. Now they were an invitation. Not to do, not to solve, but to rest. To rest in the truth that God is still God, even when we no longer work, even when we forget names, even when we move slower, even when we wonder what tomorrow holds. Still, He holds us. Caleb tilted his head back and looked up at the branches. They reminded him of arms not his, but the Father's, strong, outstretched, always waiting. And he whispered again, not out of need, but out of love. Thank you. That was all. No sermon, no list of requests. Just gratitude for a bench, a tree, and the God who sat quietly beside him. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. You don't need to earn stillness. God offers it freely, as a place to be loved, not measured. In my Father's house are many rooms. I go to prepare a place for you. John 14:2. That evening, as twilight settled like a blessing over the fields, Caleb lingered near the doorway of his small bedroom. He had left the lamp on. The soft amber light spilled across the quilt and touched the old bookshelf in the corner, the one filled with devotionals, letters, and memories too sacred to name. He didn't feel afraid, just quiet. He had been thinking about heaven lately, not in a dramatic way, but in the soft way a soul does when it has lived enough years to know this world is not the end. Not an ending, just a doorway. He sat down on the edge of the bed and rested his hands on his knees. The house was still. The clock ticked softly. A distant owl called from the trees. Caleb smiled. I wonder what my room will be like, he whispered. It wasn't a fearful question. It wasn't about streets of gold or harps or clouds. It was about belonging. About the promise that Jesus had gone ahead to prepare something not just beautiful, but personal. A place just for him. Take a deep breath. There is a room with your name on it. He pictured it not with grandeur, but with gentleness. Maybe a rocking chair by a river. Maybe shelves filled with stories he never had time to finish here. Maybe a garden where he could walk beside the one who had walked with him through every season of life. Jesus had said, I go to prepare a place for you. And Caleb believed him, because all his life, the Lord had prepared moments of peace when he should have been anxious, moments of joy in the middle of sorrow, moments of comfort when everything else had fallen apart. If God had prepared those, surely he was preparing something even more beautiful now. And not just a place, but a place where he would be known. A place where the ache would finally quiet. A place where no one would be missing anymore. He wasn't in a hurry. He still cherished the slow rhythm of these days. The birds, the quiet bench, the tea, the Bible open on his lap. But the thought brought him peace. There was a room, and it wasn't empty. It was being prepared, lovingly, patiently, by the same hands that had once held nails and now held him. Caleb leaned back on the pillows and let his eyes close. The blanket wrapped around him felt warm, but the thought of heaven wrapped around him even warmer. He didn't need to know what it looked like. He only needed to know who was waiting there. And that was enough. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. Jesus is preparing a place just for you, not because he has to, but because he wants to welcome you home. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. Psalm 139:16. The next day was quiet. A soft drizzle fell outside, washing the windows in slow, graceful streaks. The kind of rain that didn't rush, the kind that simply reminded the world to pause. Caleb sat at his desk by the window, an old journal open in front of him. The leather cover was worn thin. The pages inside were creased, a little faded, but still held the weight of his handwriting and his heart. He had been journaling on and off since his late 20s. Not every day, not even every year, but enough to have pieces of his life caught in ink. He turned the pages slowly, one by one. A prayer from his first year of marriage, a note about his daughter losing her first tooth, paragraph written the day his wife was diagnosed, a line of praise written during a quiet sunrise. On a fishing trip, he paused, fingers resting gently on the paper. So much life, so many moments, some of them painful, some of them full of laughter, and most of them ordinary. And yet, in the ordinary, God had been writing something extraordinary. Take a deep breath. Let God remind you of the pages He's already written. Caleb thought about that scripture again. All the days ordained for me were written in your book. It amazed him that even before he took his first breath, God had already held every chapter of his life, not just the good one, but all of them. The confused chapters, the grieving chapters, the ones with unanswered prayers, the ones where he nearly lost faith. They were all part of the story, and none of them wasted. He realized something in that moment. God wasn't editing his story to make it more impressive. He was redeeming it to make it more whole. Every page mattered, even the ones Caleb never shared with anyone else, even the ones he wanted to forget. He looked out the rain-streaked window and whispered, "Thank you for seeing it all and loving me anyway." He wasn't afraid of the ending anymore, because now he knew God wasn't just the author of his life. He was also the reader, the one who lingered on each sentence with tenderness. And when the final page comes, Caleb believed with all his heart. The Lord will not sigh with disappointment. He will smile. And he will say, "I remember this one, this page, this moment was holy to me." Bedtime spiritual takeaway. God is not skipping through your life. He reads every line of your story with love, even the quiet ones. Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. Psalm 119, 105. The rain continued through the evening. Steady, gentle, like a quiet song playing just beneath the silence. Caleb had turned on the small lamp beside his bed. Its light was soft and golden, casting a slow glow on the worn wooden nightstand. The open Bible, and the pair of reading glasses resting gently on top. He didn't feel like reading tonight, but he left the Bible open anyway. There was something comforting about it, the way the pages lay open, waiting. The way the words remained, even when his eyes were too tired to take them in. It reminded him of God, always open, always waiting, always faithful, even when we grow weary. Take a deep breath. Let the soft light of his word quiet your heart. He glanced at the page. It was Psalm 119, a long psalm. One he'd read many times, though he'd rarely made it through the whole thing in one sitting. But his eyes settled on a single line. Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. He didn't need more than that tonight. A lamp, not a spotlight, not a floodlight, just a lamp. Enough to see the next step, enough to walk through the night without falling. And that's what life had become in these later years. Not a sprint, not a journey mapped with precision, but a gentle walk with just enough light for today. He remembered the times when he demanded more from God, more clarity, more direction, more control, and how God, in His mercy, had often answered with just enough. Enough strength for the moment, enough grace for the hour, enough light to know he wasn't alone. Caleb turned off the lamp, but the warmth of its glow lingered in the room like the echo of a whispered truth. He pulled the blanket up to his chest and whispered, "I don't need to know the whole path. Lord, just stay with me for the next step." And somehow he knew the answer already. "Yes, child, I am with you. Not just in the daylight, but in the dusk, in the dim hallways of aging, in the midnight questions, in the final rooms of life." He didn't fear the dark anymore, because the light was not something he carried. It was someone who carried him. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. You may not see the whole path, but God's word will always light the step you're on. My sheep listen to my voice. I know them, and they follow me. I give them eternal life, and they shall never perish. John 10:27-28. The wind picked up a little that night. Not loud, not threatening, just enough to rustle the trees and hum softly through the eaves of the house. Caleb was already in bed, eyes closed, breathing slow. But he was not yet asleep. There are moments just before sleep where the soul feels open, like the veil between heaven and earth grows thin, like you can almost hear more than your ears allow. And in that tender in-between place, he remembered the voice. Not audible, not human, but familiar. The voice he had followed for decades now, sometimes with certainty and other times trembling. It was the voice of the shepherd. Take a deep breath. Let the shepherd call your name again. He thought about the sheep in the Bible, not clever creature, not fierce or fast. Just dependent. And yet, loved, known by name, guided through valleys, sought after when lost, carried when broken. My sheep listen to my voice. Caleb had heard that voice in every season. When he said yes at the altar, when his children cried in the night, when he buried his parents, then his friends, and finally, the love of his life. That voice had always come, sometimes in sermons, sometimes in scripture, sometimes in silence, but always faithfully. He knew it wasn't his imagination. He could never have conjured the kind of peace it brought, the way it wrapped around his fear like a soft blanket, the way it found him when he didn't even know he was lost. And tonight, even as age pressed heavier on his bones, he knew that voice had not grown tired of calling him. I know them. Yes, that's what made it all bearable, the knowing. Not being seen as a task or a project or a soul on a list, but being known as Caleb, as beloved, as one who mattered. He opened his eyes for a moment and whispered, "I'm still listening, Lord." And then he smiled, because deep in his spirit he felt it again. The shepherd was near, walking the halls of his quiet house, watching over him, keeping the night. Not just the night outside, but the deeper night, the one inside us all. The one that sometimes wonders, even after all these years, am I still yours? Yes, child, you are mine. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. God has not forgotten your name. The shepherd still calls and still walks with you through every night. I have engraved you on the palms of my hands. Isaiah 49:16. The days had grown shorter. Evening came sooner now, like a gentle reminder to slow down, to let go, to breathe. Caleb had started noticing his hands more, the way the skin had softened and wrinkled, the faint tremble when he reached for his cup, the age spots scattered like stories across his knuckles. These hands had held so much over the years. They had rocked babies, fixed broken chairs, wiped tears his own and others, held wedding rings, funeral programs, and folded prayers. He turned them over now, studying them in the fading light. They had changed, but they were still his, still marked by a life that had loved and lost and trusted. And then, a quiet verse returned to him, not with fanfare, but like an old friend stepping through the door. I have engraved you on the palms of my hands. Take a deep breath. Let that truth settle in you. Engraved. Not written with ink, not penciled in to be erased, but engraved, carved into the very hands of God. Caleb closed his eyes. What kind of love does that? Not the kind that watches from a distance, not the kind that forgets when we fail, but the kind that stays, the kind that hurts when we hurt, the kind that carries us when we cannot walk, the kind that says, I have held you so close, you have become part of me. And suddenly his old, tired hands didn't feel so weak, they felt honored. Not for what they could still do, but for the one who had held them all this time. He thought about the storms he'd been through, the job loss, the miscarriage, the years when prayer felt like shouting into the wind, and yet, the shepherd had never let go. He thought about the celebrations too, the laughter around family tables, the long walks on quiet trails, the nights under the stars when everything felt right. In it all, God's hands had been there. Steady, patient, engraved with love. Caleb slowly lifted his hands toward the ceiling. Not high, just a little, as if to say, I still trust you. He didn't speak the words out loud. He didn't need to. The silence knew. God knew. The hands that held the stars still held him and would never let go. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. You are not forgotten. Your name is carved into the very hands of the one who made you, and he will never let go. His mercies are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. Lamentations 3:23. The morning light slipped slowly across the floorboards. It wasn't loud or sudden, just gentle, like someone lifting the curtain of night with reverence. Caleb blinked slowly as he woke, his eyes adjusting to the soft glow rising in the room. There was no pain today, not much anyway. Just that quiet stiffness that comes with age, a reminder that this body had been well used, well traveled. He sat up in bed, not rushing. The house was quiet, and no voices, no to-do lists, no expectations. Only light and the presence he had come to know better than his own breath. He let his feet rest on the floor a moment before standing. And as he did, a simple thought arrived, not grand, but grounding. It's a new morning, inside me too. Take a deep breath. Let morning rise in your soul. He had always loved the idea of morning. Not because everything changed overnight, but because morning meant mercy. New mercy. That verse had stayed with him since his youth. His mercies are new every morning. He hadn't always understood it, but now, older and slower, he had grown into it. Mercy wasn't about being spared from hardship. It was about being met in it. Every day, every breath, new, again and again. Caleb walked to the kitchen, made tea instead of coffee. The kettle sang its soft tune, and as he poured the steaming water, he whispered, "Thank you for meeting me again today, Lord." It didn't matter that he had little on the calendar. Didn't matter that the phone rarely rang. What mattered was this: God had shown up again, the same way he had yesterday and the day before that. And every morning since Caleb first whispered yes to Jesus all those years ago. Faithfulness. That's what it was. Not performance, not perfection. Just the quiet faithfulness of a God who never forgot to rise with the sun and never missed a single morning of mercy. Caleb took his tea to the window seat and watched the fog lift from the distant trees. Something stirred inside him, not emotion exactly, but something deeper. Hope. Not the loud kind, not the leaping, shouting kind, but the kind that curls up beside you and stays. The kind that says you are not starting this day alone. You never have. You never will. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. God's mercy meets you every morning, not because you've earned it, but because He never stops loving you. You are the God who sees me. Genesis 16:13. That afternoon, the clouds returned. They didn't bring rain this time, just a gentle grayness that softened everything, the edges of the trees, the tops of the hills, even the silence in the room. Caleb sat in his favorite chair, a worn quilt over his knees. There were no tasks to finish, no one expecting him. The hours stretched quietly before him, like an open field. And in that quiet, a thought rose from somewhere deep. Does anyone see me anymore? Not in bitterness, not in sadness, just in honesty. He was grateful for the phone calls from his children, for the neighbor who sometimes brought soup, for the church bulletin mailed each week. But there were moments, even now, where invisibility whispered too loudly, where he felt like a leaf in the corner, once bright, now barely noticed. Take a deep breath. Let this truth wash over you gently. You are the God who sees me. He remembered reading that verse years ago, the story of a servant girl in the desert, abandoned and afraid, and how God met her there, not just with provision, but with His eyes, His attention, His love. He saw her, and she gave him a name, El Roy, the God who sees. Caleb looked out the window. The sky was soft and wide. Do you see me too, Lord, he whispered. And deep in his soul a warmth answered, not with words, but with a certainty that moved like water through dry places. Yes, I see you. I've always seen you. I saw you when you were a boy, sitting on the porch in bare feet. I saw you when you stood trembling, holding your firstborn. I saw you when your hands built and fixed and carried. I saw you when you wept and no one else knew why. And I see you now, in this quiet room, wrapped in a quilt, waiting for me. Tears formed in Caleb's eyes, not from sadness, but from the weight of being seen. Fully, tenderly, without performance. He wiped his eyes with the corner of the quilt and smiled. Not many things felt certain at this age, but this did. He was not forgotten. He was not invisible. He was still beloved, seen by the only one who had watched every breath from the beginning and never once looked away. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. You are not invisible. God sees you fully, tenderly, and never stops gazing at you with love. Cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you. 1 Peter 5:7. The wind outside picked up by evening. Not harsh, just steady like an unseen hand brushing gently through the trees. Caleb stood near the window for a while, watching the shadows lengthen across the yard. There was a familiar ache in his chest, not physical, more like a thought wrapped in feeling. He wasn't sure where it came from. Maybe it was the memory of bills paid late in the past. Maybe it was the quiet that followed phone calls when everyone else seemed busy. Maybe it was the steady hum of thoughts that come with age. What if I'm forgetting too? Much, what if the next appointment brings bad news? What if? Take a deep breath. Set those what-ifs down for a moment. Caleb slowly walked to the armchair and sat down. He folded his hands not in formality, just in quiet. like someone offering up something too heavy to hold any longer. He whispered, "Lord, I still worry sometimes, even after all these years." The words weren't shameful when they were honest. God could handle honesty. He always had. Caleb had worried in every season of life, when the kids were young, when the money ran low, when the world felt unstable, and now, in the small things. Would his memory hold? Would he wake up feeling strong tomorrow? Would he be alone for the holidays? And yet through every anxious night, through every trembling prayer, God had never once failed him. He opened his Bible slowly, almost without thought. It fell to a page worn soft with time. Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. He stared at the verse for a long while, and then he closed his eyes and imagined it. A basket, woven and wide, held out by the hands of Christ. And in that basket, he began to lay his worries down, one by one. Not all at once, just the ones he could name. The fear of forgetting, the loneliness of long afternoons, the ache that came when no one said his name for days, the guilt over things he couldn't go back and fix. He placed them gently in the basket, and Jesus didn't flinch. He just received them, held them, carried them. Because that's what love does. It carries what we can't. And suddenly the wind outside didn't feel so wild. It felt like freedom, like the breath of heaven moving across his porch. Caleb rested his head back. Not everything was resolved, but everything had been released. There's a difference. And peace comes not always from answers, but from the hands that hold our questions. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. You don't have to carry your worries alone. God's hands are strong enough for every fear and tender enough to hold your heart. Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. Mark 6:31. The night fell softly like a curtain drawn slowly across the sky. Caleb moved through the house with deliberate care, turning off lamps, closing curtains, straightening cushions no one else would see. These rituals weren't necessary, perhaps, but they grounded him. They reminded him that even small things could be holy. When he returned to his room, he paused before getting into bed. There was something sacred about this time, the final stillness before sleep, the gentle hush that wrapped itself around the weary parts of his day. He turned on the small reading lamp and sat on the edge of the bed. He didn't reach for his Bible tonight, didn't journal, didn't pray in sentences. He just sat and waited. Take a deep breath. You are already in the quiet place. He thought about the words of Jesus, "Come with me into a quiet place and get some rest." He had read them years ago during a time of great weariness, a season when life had demanded more than he had to give. And back then, those words had felt like a sigh of relief. Tonight, they felt like a personal invitation. Come with me. Not to do, not to learn, not to produce, just to rest. Caleb breathed in slowly. The room was warm. The lamp's glow was kind. And in that quiet, he imagined it a small, hidden room in the heart of God, tucked away from the noise of the world, a room just for him. He didn't have to knock. He didn't even have to walk. The door was always open. All he had to do was lean inward and let grace hold him. He whispered, "I'm here, Lord." And in the silence, he heard it again, not audibly, but deep in his bones. "So am I." The weight in his shoulders eased, not because his life had changed in that moment, but because he had changed his posture from carrying to receiving, and the quiet room of grace welcomed him again. He turned off the lamp, laid his head against the pillow, and let his breath slow to the rhythm of mercy. There was no fear, no proving them, no list to check. Just presence, just peace. Just the gentle nearness of the one who had been waiting all along. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. There is always a quiet place in God's heart for you, a room where grace holds you, not for what you've done, but simply because you're His. Because He has set His love upon me. Therefore I will deliver Him. I will set Him on high. Because He has known my name. Psalm 91:14. The middle of the night came quietly, as it always did. No thunder, no noise, only stillness, deep and unshaken. Caleb stirred, not out of restlessness, but from something softer, like his soul had awakened while his body lay still. He did not open his eyes right away. Instead, he simply listened. Not for sounds outside, but for something within. There had been nights in the past when he woke gripped by fear. Nights filled with worry, loss, regret. But tonight, none of those visitors came. Only a hush. Only peace. He breathed in slowly, and a thought rose gently. I know His name. Take a deep breath. Let your spirit whisper the name again. He had spoken the name of Jesus thousands of times over the years. In joy, in sorrow, in need, in worship. But something about the name felt different in the quiet hours of old age. It wasn't just sacred. It was personal. Not a title, not a distant lord, but a friend, a keeper of his story. A name spoken beside hospital beds and whispered over newborns. A name that had steadied his hands when they trembled and lifted his chin when he was too weary. To try again. Jesus. There it was again, the name that had never once left him. Even in seasons when Caleb had grown cold, even in the years when his prayers were silent, even when others forgot or moved on, that name had remained close, true, kind. He opened his eyes and stared into the darkness. There was nothing to see, but everything to feel. He didn't need light to sense His presence. The room, though empty to the world, felt full. And he whispered aloud, You have been my home, Lord, my whole life. It was true. More than any address, more than any person, Jesus had been the constant, the safe place, the name that never turned him away. He rested his hand on his chest, felt the slow rhythm of his heartbeat, and imagined it beating in time with heaven itself. And he knew when that final breath came, whenever it would not be the end. It would be a beginning, because he knew His name, and more importantly, he was known by Him. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. Knowing the name of Jesus is not just a comfort, it is your anchor in every season, your final peace, and your forever home. I am convinced that neither death nor life, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. Romans 8:38-39. The morning came, but this one felt different. There was a hush in the air deeper than silence, a stillness that wrapped the whole house like a blanket. Soft light filtered through the curtains and settled gently on Caleb's bedside. He lay there, peaceful, face calm, hands folded. There had been no struggle, only a breath that slowed and then ceased. Not with fear, not with resistance, but with the surrender of someone who had already stepped halfway into heaven. The room held no grief in that moment, only presence, only peace. Take a deep breath. You are not alone in this hour. If you had been there, you might have sensed it too. the nearness, the weightless glory just beyond the veil. For the shepherd had come, not loudly, not suddenly, but gently, the same way he always did. He came with hands that still bore scars, and eyes that still bore tears. And he whispered to Caleb the same words. He whispers to all who are his. "Come, child, I have waited long to walk you home." And Caleb, who had spent so many quiet nights waiting, listening, believing now, stepped fully into the warmth he had long felt in shadows. The porch light he had once dreamed of. It was real. It had never gone out. There was a room prepared, a table waiting, a place with his name on it. And joy, joy not loud, but deep, the kind that does not need to announce itself because it simply is. The house was quiet now, but not empty. Because love had been here, love had stayed, and love had carried him all the way home. Outside, the wind moved gently through the tree. The old sycamore stood tall, and somewhere in the eternal hush of morning, a voice could still be heard, the voice that had never stopped calling him. "Well done, welcome home, you are mine. Forever. Itwitst. When your journey is over, love will still be waiting. Nothing, not even death, can separate you from the one who has walked with you every step of the way."